Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times. Hello, and welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. We are here this week as ever. Sadly, we are down one presenter this week, and it is just myself and Francis today. But Francis, how are you doing? How has your week been?
It started very, very busy and has slowly gotten a little bit quieter, but I'm sure it will pick up again on Monday. Very jealous, actually, because Tom is in Italy right now, and apparently the weather there is just great. And we've had some pretty good weather here, but it's the lack of air conditioning here, I think, is the problem. It's been very, very hot.
It has been exceedingly warm, and it's so very British of us to complain about the weather because that's literally all we do. It's either too cold or too hot or something in between. We're never
It's
quite
raining
happy.
too
I don't
much.
think.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
never just right, but
We
yeah,
are
it
never
has been
happy.
nice. It has been
That's
nice.
what it means to be British, so it's fine. But no, I'm very excited to be here talking about fintech with you today. And I guess let's just dive straight into it. What are you going to talk about this week?
So today I'm going to be talking about the Pix payment system in Brazil and how it's starting its first steps in going global, really. Tourists and businesses are now going to be able to use the payment system, which I think is pretty cool.
Amazing stuff. And I'm going to be talking about Mama Money and Paymentology's partnership to launch a new bank card service utilizing WhatsApp banking, which is very exciting. But I am going to let you go first this week, as ever. So why don't you take it away?
Absolutely. So introduced in 2020 by the Central Bank of Brazil, the Pix digital payment system has become one of the most used payment methods in the country with over 164 million users. And I believe I saw a stat as well that said it was around 90% of transactions in Brazil were now completed with Pix, which is kind of insane when you think about it. And so while other countries around the world are looking to sort of emulate the service's success, PagBrasil, the Brazilian payment processor, is now making Pix accessible to e-commerce businesses around the globe. And this has been made possible through two new instant payment solutions, Pix Roaming and International Pix. So the former of those two services will enable tourists visiting Brazil to complete transactions instantly wherever Pix is accepted. And they will also be able to benefit from the usual offers associated with Pix, including discounts. And additionally, they will be able to pay as simply as local consumers, either selecting Pix at checkout, scanning a QR code, or entering a Pix code to complete the transaction. International Pix enables Brazilians to use the instant payment system at participating physical stores while traveling outside of Brazil. And both are PagBrasil solutions that integrate with POS solutions and e-wallets provided by its partner providers. So what I wanted to talk about really, why I think it's so exciting is for the longest time, I think we've seen other countries talk about the Pix payment system in Brazil and how successful it's really been. I mean, it's really enabled sort of a developing country for the most part to really bring the access to finance. Or, we always discuss access to finance, but it's really made it very, very accessible to everyone, really, because you don't need a previous bank account to make these transactions. But everyone has a phone, and it's very easy just to sort of be like, I want to send this person money, there it's sent, done. And there is really no sort of confusions about it. There's, it's very seamless and very quick and very, very easy to use. And all those things, when you add them together, are a recipe for success. And lo and behold, we've got over a 90% sort of transaction usage. But what I wanted to talk to you about really is, we've seen US and European countries want to adopt the payment system. And in terms of sort of financial inclusion and how it's really expanding, and, we're always seeing organizations be like, this is what we're doing to be more inclusive. This is what we're doing to create access to finance. In light of all that, do you think this first step by PagBrasil will sort of see the Pix payment system go to, Europe and the US, or do you think it's always going to be sort of centralized around Brazil and maybe sort of other Latin American countries, but it's really going to stay there and we'll just see sort of clones of it more than actually the same system used abroad?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting piece, and I think it's a really interesting question that you pose. I guess, for starters, things like this are really great examples of how, like you were saying, fintech can really help improve access for people in, perhaps less developed countries when it comes to sort of economic and financial purposes. I think, obviously Pix is going to be brilliant for a lot of people in Brazil. And I think it's really interesting that these two new solutions are kind of looking at other markets. And I definitely think that there is some opportunity here for, to break into other territories, like you're saying, like possibly the US or maybe even Europe or other places like that. I think by making, international tourists and travelers able to make purchases, through Pix roaming, I think that's a really interesting concept. And I think that's something that a lot of people are possibly going to get involved with, especially considering how popular it is as a payment method in Brazil anyway. I feel like, whenever you do go to a different country, especially one that's, a very different culture to your own, I think it's always trying to look at what is the localized way of doing things, what's the local payment methods, what's the local way to, call a taxi or things like that. So having this in your back pocket, that means that you can, make your payments nice and easily, not worrying about exchange rates or things like that, I think is brilliant. And yeah, I think the Brazilians abroad, international picks concept is really interesting as well, because again, I can see that possibly, having some legs in other places as well. Purely because, as Brazilians travel abroad, they're going to bring their picks with them, and then maybe, that'll start getting some uptake and some interest from a lot of people around there. So yeah, I think it's definitely very interesting, and I think it's nice to see travelers and tourists being sort of looked at, especially now, obviously coming into summer when it is literally the travel season. And it's great to see like just ways to make things easier for everyone. So I think, the for all the foreign tourists that do come to Brazil, I definitely think that they're going to really love the Pix roaming solution. And I guess we'll just have to see how it goes. I mean, if it's a great summer for it in Brazil, then maybe it'll start rolling it out in other places as well. But I think it's obviously a very exciting time for Pix, and just to kind of understand how payment solutions work in Brazil and LATAM and all those other lovely things. So yeah, it's really interesting one.
Yeah, I think Pix roaming especially I think will be the big one, because I think for let's say people in the US, when they see that there is this Pix sort of payment system available at the POS systems, and they're like, well, I don't really know this, I don't need to use it, I'm sorted, I can use my dollars whichever way I want. Whereas when they go to visit Brazil, and then they see everywhere it's sort of plastered, wherever you look, it says Pix Pay here, blah blah blah. And I think seeing that Pix roaming and seeing how simple and effective it is to use, I think that's more likely to have a let's bring this technology home effect. That they'll see how quick and easy it was, they'll see how accessible it was, and they'll go back to their countries, wherever it might be, and they'll say, I really enjoyed using this, and their banking providers will have to sort of listen and be like, all right, so how are we going to adopt something to make it as simple as this? And I think that will be maybe like the start of seeing, like I mentioned before, the clones abroad. But no, you're right. I think it is a really interesting time, especially now, as you said, in sort of the summer holidays period. I think is a very, very good time for this to really be rolling out. And yeah, no, credit to PagBrasil. I think it's a really good solution, and looking forward to see what happens next.
I guess part of it as well comes down to sort of the cashless kind of thing we're having at the moment, isn't it? Where tourists and travelers may not necessarily change money as much as they used to do anymore. I know when I go on holiday, I don't really change as much physical cash for like local currencies as I used to, because obviously you can just use your card everywhere. But in somewhere like Brazil, where that's maybe a little bit more difficult or a little less widely available, I guess that's a really great place as well, as sort of an alternative to, like travelers cards or things like that. Being able to have that there is really interesting. So yeah, I just wanted to add that based on what you just said. But yeah.
Well, actually, yeah, that's just reminded me as well. We always sort of hear about how fintechs are, for especially for business, sort of offering localized payment services, because we've always sort of or we have discussed before the importance of understanding your local market and how to really interact with them. From a tourist standpoint, this is the perfect solution, because now there. I think it said that there's 6 million foreign tourists in 2023 who spent around $7 billion. I mean, that $7 billion could easily sort of be like, there could be more to it if there was an easier access and accessible way to make payments. So yeah, I think it is just a very, very cool sort of an appropriate sort of local. I don't. I guess it is a localized payment method, isn't it? Really, it's just making it more accessible. But yeah, very, very cool.
Yeah, awesome. I guess moving on to my story then, very similar in kind of topic, because obviously we're still talking about payments and different access to payments. So essentially, Mama Money has launched a WhatsApp banking card to help simplify access to finance. They've partnered with Paymentology to and Access Bank. Sorry, I should have mentioned at the beginning, to launch this new service, which essentially is helping to empower underserved communities through access to critical finance services. So by integrating with WhatsApp, this card allows users to transfer payments internationally, buy electricity and airtime, download bank statements, check balances, and manage their account using the data-friendly messaging platform. So I thought this was a really interesting thing, especially as we're just talking about sort of like access to finance and things like that. And this Mama Money card is kind of looking more in like migrants, providing platforms for like safe and secure payments, encouraging savings, and just generally really promoting financial well-being in order to help, dismantle different financial barriers and promote inclusivity throughout finances. So I thought this was a really interesting one to bring up today, especially in reference to your article, because I think it's that idea of how do you make financial services more accessible to those who are unbanked. And I think the majority of Mama Money's customers are in, South Africa, who are mainly from countries like Zimbabwe, Malawi, Nigeria, things like that. And so having a bank card that can give them access to financial services and then be able to make those cross-border payments back to their home countries if they so need to, I think that's, really fantastic. And having that security and the sort of safety of these systems, I think is really interesting. But I think from another standpoint, what is really interesting is this whole kind of WhatsApp banking aspect of it. I think we talk a lot previously about sort of the idea of maybe a super app, like with Uber and like, with the sort of the Chinese Asian super apps like WeChat and things like that kind of coming onto the scene. Is this WhatsApp's attempt to become more of like a WeChat or a thing like that? And I think this is a really interesting concept. I haven't really heard a lot about WhatsApp Bank recently in their kind of move into the financial space. So I think this service using WhatsApp banking is really interesting, especially to use it in such a way that is, in terms of trying to provide finances to people who are traditionally sort of unbanked for. So, I mean, yeah, I'd love to know what you think about this, Francis. Like, I guess on two fronts. Firstly, what do you think about the whole concept and like how is this sort of bridging the gap when it comes to financial inclusion? But then also on the flip side of it, what do you think about the whole WhatsApp bank being involved? Is this WhatsApp's push to try and be the next super app, or is this just just another thing that's happening? I'd love to get your thoughts.
I think from my point of view, they both those questions could sort of be answered in the sense of just Paymentology, Mama Money, and Access Bank have all sort of realized, what are people using, and people are using WhatsApp. And therefore, when you're looking at sort of financial inclusion, it's like we were saying in the last article, you've really got to understand localized payment methods, and not even just payment methods, just a localized sort of trends and what apps are people using. And WhatsApp is clearly something that a lot of people are using. And I mean that's a trend seen globally. I mean, try and find me a country that isn't really using WhatsApp right now. But the point of that is that with this banking service, which similar to you, I haven't really heard that much about it either. But the fact that it is offered and it is sort of filling this gap that other people, previously, or, in terms of savings and in terms of, freezing your card, as is mentioned in the article, if due to theft or just to losing it, if that's needed, it is a very easy and accessible way to do it through your phone, through a messaging service, which you've probably used to death at that point. And I think when organizations do start to sort of realize, what are our customers using? What do they want? How do they want to their services to be integrated into their everyday lives? A messaging service to then have this sort of banking offering, I think is really, really cool. And like, it really does help, deal with the problem of access to finance, because, in a lot of African countries, there are a lot of unbanked and underbanked people, unfortunately, due to the whatever circumstances they may be in. But access to a phone is much easier than access to a bank, and you can get WhatsApp, and then the banking service is right there. So I think the partnership is really, really good and will be massively beneficial for the users. And yeah, I think while it is going to be a sort of a continued paid for thing, I think it definitely is going to be worth it in the long while for consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with everything that you've said. And I think, like we were talking about with Pix, I think this is just another example of fintech or like financial services providers, etc., really just showing up and meeting consumers where they are and providing the services and the things that, people need or people want that they haven't traditionally necessarily had access to. So I think, yeah, this is a really great thing to see, and it'd be interesting to see if it sort of moves into other spaces. I know obviously we're looking at specifically sort of Africa right now, but it'll be interesting to see if this moves into other territories, like we were talking about with Pix and things, and how that kind of changes and that kind of evolves over time. But yeah, it's a very interesting time, I guess, for payments and cross-border payments and that sort of industry. It feels like a lot's going on in that space, so it'll be interesting to keep an eye on as we move forward within the year. So, anyway, that brings us nicely to the end of our discussion today. Thank you so much, Francis, for bringing these articles. If you want to hear any more of what we've talked about today or anything else about the fintech world, head on over to thefintechtimes.com, where there are plenty more news and insights over there. But very quickly, let's move on to what I learned this week. So, each week, we learn so much new news and information crossing our desks that about the fintech world that we thought it'd be fun to share that with our listeners. So, Francis, what have you learned this week?
So, a month ago, O3 Capital, the Nigerian fintech and non-bank credit card issuer, launched 4 American Express cards, and a month later, it has revealed that its American Express Green Card and the O3 American Express Platinum Card have proven to be the standout performers. And I just thought it was quite interesting to see that both have been used by everyday consumers as well as senior professionals and corporates, proving their broad appeal and widespread benefits.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you. I have actually learned 2 things this week. The first thing being so many more people from the fintech world go to Glastonbury than you think they do, because the amount of out of office emails I've had this week saying that people are away at Glastonbury is shocking. So I hope everyone who's there is having fun. And the second thing I learned this week is a little
Definitely
bit
not
more.
jealous.
No, not at all. To be fair, actually, I don't think I'd enjoy Glastonbury. I'm not a festival kind of person. I like being at home. Um, just as an aside. But the thing that I've actually learned this week about the fintech world is that 4/5 of tabby shoppers plan to use buy now pay later services for essential purchases in 2024, according to their new survey. And I thought this was interesting because of kind of discussions we've had previously about buy now pay later and how it's evolved, and also how it's kind of being used in this new economy that we're kind of seeing at the moment this year. So I just thought that was an interesting stat for us to keep an eye on. But anyway, thank you so much, Francis, for joining me again. Sad to not have Tom this week, but I think we smashed it as per usual. So yeah, thank you for joining me, and I guess I'll catch you on the next one.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using hashtag TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.